The appointment. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Prime Minister James Hartley was in his study at number 10, already dressed, already caffeinated, already reviewing the day's briefing papers when his chief of staff, Chen, knocked urgently. "We have a problem," David said. James looked up. David had been with him for 8 years, through the opposition years, through the election, through the first rocky months of government. David didn't panic. If David said they had a problem, they had a problem. How bad? Ambassador level bad, potentially government-ending bad. James set down his coffee. "Come in," closed the door. 6 weeks earlier, James had made what he thought was a brilliant appointment. Sir Michael Ashford, veteran diplomat, former cabinet minister, architect of 3 major trade deals, as ambassador to the United States. It was a coup. Michael had experience, connections, gravitas. The Americans loved him. The business community praised the choice. There had been whispers, of course. There were always whispers. Michael had resigned from cabinet 12 years ago under mysterious circumstances. Something about a conflict of interest, though the details were never made public. But that was ancient history. Michael had been cleared by the Ethics Committee. He'd spent the intervening years in the private sector, advising governments around the world. He was clean. Or so James had believed. "What is it?" James asked David now. David handed him a tablet. On the screen was an email exchange, dated 2015. The sender was Viktor Petrov, a Russian oligarch who'd been sanctioned by the UK 3 years ago for his ties to the Kremlin and allegations of money laundering. The recipient was Michael Ashford. James read the first email, then the second, then the third. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "There are 17 more," David said quietly. "They span 3 years, 2014 to 2017. Where did these come from?" Anonymous tip to The Guardian. "They're planning to run the story tomorrow morning. I've got their political editor on hold, asking for comment." James's mind raced. The emails showed Michael Ashford providing strategic advice to Petrov about UK sanctions policy, about regulatory loopholes, about which officials might be sympathetic to Russian business interests. Nothing explicitly illegal, but deeply, deeply inappropriate. And James had appointed him ambassador 6 weeks ago. "Did the vetting process not catch this?" James asked. David's silence was answer enough. "David, did the vetting catch it?" "Yes," David said finally. "It was in the security file, flagged as a concern, but the assessment concluded it was old news, that Ashford had severed ties with Petrov years ago and that." "Who made that assessment?" "I did." The room went very quiet. James looked at his chief of staff, his friend, and felt something cold settle in his stomach. "You knew about this when I made the appointment." "I knew there had been contact. I didn't know the extent. I didn't know about the sanctions advice." "But you knew enough to tell me." "I made a judgment call. Michael's appointment was important. The U.S. relationship is crucial. I thought we could manage it." "Manage it?" James repeated. "David, he was advising a Russian oligarch on how to evade British sanctions while he was supposedly serving British interests. And you thought we could manage it." "I thought it was overblown, I thought." "You thought wrong." David's face was pale. "What do you want me to do?" James stood, walked to the window. Outside, London was waking up. Commuters, tourists, civil servants heading to their offices. Normal people living normal lives, unaware that their government was about to implode. "Call the Guardian back," James said. "Tell them we're investigating. Buy us 24 hours. And then I figure out how to save this government." By noon, James had assembled his inner circle in the cabinet room. Chen, obviously. Elizabeth Moore, his director of communications. Sir Anthony Blackwell, the cabinet secretary. And Margaret Winters, his deputy prime minister, who looked at him with something between sympathy and barely concealed fury. "Right," James began. "You've all seen the emails, you know what we're facing. The Guardian runs this story tomorrow and we have to be ready. Options." Elizabeth spoke first. "We acknowledge the emails exist, say they were reviewed during vetting, and that we stand by the appointment. Michael Ashford's work with Petrov ended years ago before the sanctions. No crime was committed. We move on." "That makes it look like we don't care about Russian influence," Margaret said sharply. "Like we're soft on corruption." "The alternative," Elizabeth countered, "is to throw Michael under the bus and admit we made a catastrophic error in judgment, which makes us look incompetent." "We were incompetent," Margaret said. "We appointed someone with ties to a sanctioned oligarch as our ambassador to our most important ally. That's the definition of incompetent." "Margaret," David began. "Don't," Margaret cut him off. "You're the one who cleared him, David. You're the one who told the PM this was fine. So don't lecture me about party unity." Sir Anthony, who'd been silent, cleared his throat. "The real question, Prime Minister, is what you knew and when you knew it." Everyone turned to look at James. "The vetting file mentioned Ashford had historical contact with Petrov," James said carefully. "It was flagged but assessed as low risk. I signed off on that assessment." "Did you read the actual emails?" Anthony asked. James hesitated. "No, I trusted the assessment." "Then you can honestly say you didn't know the full extent of the relationship when you made the appointment," Anthony said. "That's defensible." "It's also a lie of omission," Margaret said. "You knew there was contact. You chose not to dig deeper. That's negligence, not innocence." "What would you have me do?" James asked, his frustration showing. "Fall on my sword, resign, hand the government to the opposition over this?" "I'd have you take responsibility," Margaret said. "Admit the mistake. Withdraw Ashford's appointment. Apologize to the American government. And yes, accept that there will be consequences." "Including your resignation," Elizabeth said to David, not unkindly. David nodded slowly. "If that's what it takes." James felt the weight of it pressing down on him. 6 months into government and already facing a crisis that could end it all. He'd been so careful, so prepared, and still it came to this. "We need more information," he said. "Anthony, I want to know everything about Ashford's relationship with Petrov. Every email, every meeting, every phone call. I want to know if anyone else knew about this and didn't flag it. And I want to know who leaked these emails and why." "Prime Minister," Anthony said carefully, "if we go digging, we might find things we don't want to find." "Then we find them," James said. "Because the Guardian already has them, and I'd rather not be blindsided again." The investigation took 18 hours. By dawn the next morning, the day the Guardian's story would break, James had a full picture, and it was worse than he'd imagined. Michael Ashford hadn't just advised Viktor Petrov. He'd received payments. £2.3 million over 3 years, routed through shell companies, technically legal but ethically unconscionable. The payments had stopped in 2017 when Petrov was first investigated, but the relationship had continued informally for another 2 years. And the vetting process had caught all of it. The security file was damning. It detailed the payments, the advice, the ongoing contact, and it recommended against appointing Ashford to any position requiring security clearance. David Chen had overruled that recommendation. He'd written a memo arguing that Ashford's value outweighed the historical concerns, and James had signed off on it without reading the underlying file. "Did anyone else know?" James asked Anthony. "Your foreign secretary was briefed. He raised concerns but ultimately deferred to your judgment." "So Robert knew?" "Yes." James thought about Robert Thornton, his foreign secretary, a political ally for 20 years. Robert had said nothing when the appointment was announced, had attended the celebration dinner, had publicly praised the choice. And privately, he'd known it was wrong. Who leaked the emails? James asked. Anthony hesitated. We're not certain, but the metadata suggests they came from inside government, someone with access to the vetting files. The implications hung in the air. This wasn't just a scandal, it was a betrayal from within. The Guardian story broke at 7:00 a.m. By 7:15, James's phone was ringing off the hook. By 8:00, the opposition leader was calling for his resignation. By 9:00, 3 backbench MPs from his own party had publicly demanded he withdraw Ashford's appointment. At 10:00 a.m., James stood in the House of Commons for Prime Minister's questions. The opposition leader, Chen, no relation to David, rose with barely concealed glee. "Will the Prime Minister tell this House," she began, "whether he was aware of Michael Ashford's financial relationship with sanctioned Russian oligarch Viktor Petrov when he appointed him as ambassador to the United States?" James stood. The chamber was packed, every seat filled, the press gallery overflowing. "I was aware," he said slowly, "that the vetting process had identified historical contact between Sir Michael and Mr. Petrov. That contact was assessed as not presenting a current security risk." "That's not what I asked," Sarah said. "Did you know about the £2.3 million in payments? Did you know about the sanctions advice? Did you know, Prime Minister, that you were appointing someone who had enriched himself by helping a Russian oligarch evade British law?" The chamber erupted, shouts from the opposition benches, uncomfortable silence from his own side. "I relied on the security assessment," James said, his voice firm. "That assessment concluded." "The assessment recommended against the appointment," Sarah shouted over the noise. "Your own security services told you not to do this and you did it anyway. Why?" "Because the assessment was overruled based on a fuller consideration." "By whom? Who overruled it?" James looked across the chamber at Sarah Chen, then up at the press gallery, then back at his own benches, where Robert Thornton sat with his arms crossed, and Margaret Winters stared straight ahead, and David Chen was conspicuously absent. He could blame David. That would be easy. David had already offered to resign. James could say he relied on his chief of staff's judgment, that he was let down by his team, that mistakes were made but not by him. It would probably work. The media would devour David. James might survive. But it would be a lie. "I did," James said quietly. The chamber fell silent. "I overruled the security recommendation," he said, louder now. "I was advised of the concerns. I chose to proceed with the appointment. That decision was mine." Sarah Chen looked almost disappointed. She'd expected him to dodge. "Then you knowingly appointed someone with financial ties to a sanctioned Russian oligarch." "I believed," James said, "that those ties were historical and that Sir Michael's qualifications outweighed the concerns. I was wrong, and I take full responsibility for that error in judgment." "Will you withdraw the appointment?" "Yes." "Will you apologize to the American government?" "I already have." "Will you resign?" James paused. This was the moment. He could step down, hand over to Margaret, probably save the party from electoral disaster, or he could fight and drag everyone down with him. "No," he said, "I made a mistake, a serious one, but I will not compound that mistake by abandoning the government I was elected to lead. I will accept whatever consequences this House deems appropriate, but I will not resign." The chamber exploded again. His own backbenchers looked torn between relief and horror. The opposition was screaming for his head. And in the gallery, James caught sight of David Chen, watching with something that might have been pride or might have been grief. The vote of no confidence came 3 days later. James spent those days in an endless series of meetings, with backbenchers, with party donors, with media editors, with anyone who might help him survive. Margaret came to his office the night before the vote. You should withdraw, she said without preamble. You're going to lose, and if you lose, it destroys the party's credibility. I might win, James said. You won't, I've counted. You're 15 votes short, maybe 20. Then I'll lose with dignity. There's no dignity in losing, James, only defeat. He looked at her, his deputy, his colleague, possibly his successor. Why are you here, Margaret? If you think I'm finished, why not just wait for tomorrow? She sat down heavily. Because I don't want to be Prime Minister this way. I don't want to inherit a government that's been destroyed by scandal. I want you to step down voluntarily, hand over with grace, and give me a chance to rebuild. And if I don't, then I'll have to challenge you after you lose tomorrow, and it will be ugly, and we'll all lose. James considered this. Margaret was probably right. She usually was, but something in him refused to quit. I appreciate the advice, he said, but my answer is no. Margaret stood. At the door she paused. David Chen resigned this morning, did you know that? James hadn't. He'd been too busy to check his personal messages. He released a statement, Margaret continued, said the decision to appoint Ashford was his fault. That he gave you bad advice and takes full responsibility. He's trying to save you. I know. Will you let him? James thought about David, his friend, his ally, his scapegoat. No, he said quietly, I won't. The vote was held at 7:00 p.m. the following day. James sat in his office, watching on television as MPs filed through the division lobbies. Elizabeth came in with updates every few minutes. Close, she said, very close. The final count was announced at 7:47 p.m. Confidence, 312. No confidence, 321. He'd lost by 9 votes. James sat very still for a moment, then stood and straightened his tie. I need to make a statement, he said. Prime Minister. Now. He stood outside number 10 in the dark, cameras flashing, reporters shouting questions. He raised a hand for silence. This evening, he began, the House of Commons voted that it no longer has confidence in my government. I accept that judgment. I will tender my resignation to His Majesty tomorrow morning and recommend that he invite the Deputy Prime Minister to form a new government. He paused. I made a serious error in judgment in appointing Sir Michael Ashford. I compounded that error by not being fully transparent with Parliament and with the public. For that, I apologize. I want to be clear. My Chief of Staff, David Chen, gave me his best advice. The failure was mine, not his. I chose to proceed with the appointment despite the warnings. That decision and the consequences that followed rest solely with me. I am proud of what this government accomplished in our brief time in office. I believe we served with honor and with the best interests of the country at heart. But I also believe in accountability. When a Prime Minister loses the confidence of the House, he must go, and so I will. Thank you. He turned and walked back into number 10 without taking questions. 6 months later, James sat in a coffee shop in his old constituency, reading the newspaper. Margaret Winters, now Prime Minister, had just announced a comprehensive review of the vetting process for senior appointments. David Chen had taken a job in the private sector and was reportedly doing well. Michael Ashford had retired from public life entirely and was living in the south of France. And James was a backbench MP again, representing the constituency he'd served for 18 years. No power, no glory, no number 10. But also no secrets, no lies, no compromises. His phone buzzed. A text from David. Saw the PM's announcement. Looks like we accomplished something after all. James smiled and typed back. We tried. That's all anyone can do. He finished his coffee, folded the newspaper, and headed to his constituency office. There were casework meetings this afternoon, nothing glamorous, just helping people navigate housing benefits and pension disputes. It wasn't being Prime Minister, but it was honest work. And after everything, that was enough. Epilogue. The leaked emails were never fully traced. The investigation concluded they likely came from within the security services, someone who believed Ashford's appointment was dangerous and was willing to risk their career to stop it. They were never identified. Sarah Chen, the opposition leader who'd grilled James so effectively, became Prime Minister 2 years later when Margaret Winters called a general election and lost. Sarah's government lasted 3 years before scandals of its own brought it down. Robert Thornton, the Foreign Secretary who'd known about Ashford's background and said nothing, left politics after the no-confidence vote. He wrote a memoir in which he admitted his cowardice and said it was the greatest regret of his career. Margaret Winters served as Prime Minister for 18 months before losing the election. She returned to the backbenches and became one of Parliament's most effective advocates for government transparency and ethics reform. And Chen. David never spoke publicly about what happened, but years later, over a private dinner with James, he said, "I should have told you everything. I should have trusted you to make the right call." "You thought you were protecting me," James replied. "I was protecting myself. I wanted the win. I wanted the successful appointment. I let my ambition override my judgment." Join the club. They'd both made mistakes, both paid prices, both learned lessons. That was politics, a series of impossible choices made with incomplete information, judged with perfect hindsight. The question wasn't whether you made mistakes. It was what you did after. The end. Reading time, approximately 42 minutes.